geopolitical news and views as we were discussing last week. I left off with our leg, which spoke about the United Kingdom, and as I said, as I suggested, the detonant between the US and UK, the bromance and chrome war between Johnson and Biden, even though there are problems in Northern Ireland, portends well for India. But let's see what he said. A new charter, current Anglo-American effort to institutionalize Western consultations with India is a long overdue correction. Like I said, the three C's, China, coronavirus, and climate change, are expected to figure prominently in Biden's effort to rally the West at a series of summits with leaders of the group of 7 leading industrial countries, the Northern Atlantic, NATO, and the European Union. If the old Atlantic Charter alienated Indian nationalism from the West, the new charter and the rebooting of Western institutions should facilitate a productive phase of India's cooperation with the US and its allies. You watch this. This is the important part. Although Indian nationalism has no quarrel with liberal internationalist framework of the old Atlantic Charter, Churchill insisted that the principle of self-determination highlighted in the charter did not apply to India. And that's a strange one. Churchill, like I told you right earlier, the current Anglo-American effort to institutionalize Western consultation with India is a long overdue correction, right? And as Roger Boy is right, global Britain is now a follower, not a leader. The integrated review emphasizes cooperation in a way that puts Johnson at Biden's shoulder. This also, folks, is advantage India. And this is what happened. Despite divergences, two leaders stressed common bonds. UK-US accord set to focus on China, and that's the important part, right? But this is something that caused some problems. Northern Ireland leaders struggled to quell worst violence in years. In Northern Ireland, flashback to the troubles. But this is where Biden came through. Biden eases trade friction with EU ahead of summit with Putin, and this included the deal of the Airbus and Boeing, right? And then what did Heiko Maas say? Europe and Asia post-COVID. Germany and its European partners are set for a more meaningful partnership with the Indo-Pacific. Europe and the countries of the Indo-Pacific need each other also in the fight against the virus. We are committed to multilateral solutions. The EU is by far the biggest supporter of the international vaccine platform COVAX, and India as a leading producer of vaccines is the most important COVAX supplier. But India let them all down, but it can gear up, right? We will all benefit from this, as without the worldwide vaccination rollout, mutations will keep on setting us back in the fight against the pandemic. But for Europe, China continues to be, as they say, a Fortesian bargain. Against a grim geopolitical backdrop, the EU recovery funds promised to reduce divisiveness in the governing council could not be more welcome. It is no wonder that ECB President Christine Lagarde wants EU politicians to enshrine next generation EU as a permanent rather than a temporary policy mechanism. Even if Europe's illiberal populists in Hungary and Poland appear to avoid accountability, yet again, their position may be more tenuous in the future. So these are the guys who are falling for China, right? This is where for India, which is important. Draghi plots 221 billion rebuilding of Italy's recession-ravaged economy. So here's another country that India obviously has good relationship with. Brussels and New Delhi plan global infrastructure projects. About time. India-EU interim trade deal likely at May summit. I think we should go and do the full Monty. Modi to meet all 27 heads of EU governments in informal summit in May. So India is making some important plays in Europe, right? Make it happen. India-EU FTA can be achieved in phases. Early harvest is a practical step. India-France talk ways to boost Indo-Pacific cooperation, discuss climate, space challenges. So European Union, right? India, Netherlands now launched strategic partnership in water sector, vow to work closely in the Indo-Pacific. Okay. Sweden now. Sweden, PM pitches Gripen fighters to meet with Modi. I think this is an important thing. I think HAL should be sold to Gripen, right? India, that came on after the meeting. India signs joint statement at G7 for freedom of expression, internet curbs, threat to democracy. Well, I hope Modi can walk the talk, because so far he just walks the walk. Walks the walk. Oh, that's a new one. EU-UK leaders join calls for full probe into COVID origins, and here India is also thrown in its weight. Very important, right? EU-US set to end trade tariffs, call for new study into COVID origins. These trade tariffs now, including steel, are going to, and the Nord Stream gas pipeline, important things to bring Europe and the United States together. Biden to rally Europeans over China, and he did a fairly good job, even though the Europeans were sulking a little bit, right? EU sets out Indo-Pacific plan, says not anti-China, but so do we, right? But everybody knows who the target is, right? And right after that, India warship kicks off maiden drill with EU naval task force. Then the European Union says path of world order to be set in Indo-Pacific, whether we like it or not. We are in the thick of things, right? Especially when India also plays a critical role is needed for this. On climate and green transition, the areas of India-EU convergence. That takes care of the European Union. Let's go to the next thing that we are talking about, that is the NATO. Civil rights, also similar. A lot for India on combating the pandemic and views on China, growing convergence and thinking on China at G7, US-EU and US-NATO summits. The US-Russia summit has neither raised undue hopes or dashed them. So that was important, right? And here we have Rudronil Ghosh throwing in a loop, a spin, an Atlantic illusion. NATO wants to deter China, but it may have few answers to what Beijing offers to countries like those in ASEAN. NATO reckons China can undermine the security interests and that China's behavior presents a systemic challenge to a rule-based international order. Fair enough. But in terms of checking China, the Western alliances may have left it too late. I don't think so. I think on the other hand, Mr. Ghosh, China unsheathed its sword too early. Indeed, history suggests the US misjudged China many times. This time, China has misjudged the resolve of the United States. Mr. Ghosh, go get yourself examined. For one, B3W will face all the debates, checks and balances inherent in democratic policy making across many countries. China's BRI is driven by unquestioned quick policy implementation backed by government-owned banks. Now, this is the stupidity of people like Mr. Ghosh. Yeah, sure it is, but it's all debt and people are beginning to realize it, and people, at the end of the day, nationalism comes out eventually. China is running roughshod all over it, Mr. Ghosh, and you don't understand, and neither do we. Second, China's influence in ASEAN is not primarily because of ports and roads it built, but the vast opportunities its economy presents to those Asian countries is hard. So I'm going to ask Mr. Ghosh, how good is this economics? Most of these ASEAN countries succeed because of exports. Where, Mr. Ghosh? To the United States, to the European Union, not to China. Not to China. So there's nothing they really get from China, folks. Nothing. Except they're a backwater production house for China, right? And China uses them to squirrel some of its exports and term them as their own. So you got to study it more. Deepening NATO dialogue with India to protect international rule-based order, address shared challenge. So this is the other important. And you got to hear John Stoltenberg, who's the writer, is the Secretary General of the NATO. He says NATO is and will remain a regional alliance for Europe and North America. However, the challenges we face are global, so we need a more global approach. Okay. I was delighted to participate for the first time in the Raisina dialogue. Hallelujah. I sent a clear message that NATO is ready and willing to increase our cooperation with like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific, including with India. India is a pivotal regional player, a growing economy and an important global actor. So growing economy is where we got to put the pump, right? It is one of the largest true contributors to UN peacekeeping missions. Many NATO allies have well-established partnerships with India and they are enhancing their engagement in the Indo-Pacific. At the same time, India is increasing its contacts with Europe and the United States. As you saw in my previous slide, we are with everybody, right? India is at the forefront of many of our shared challenges, from Afghanistan to terrorism, Afghanistan especially, and maritime security. Another one, NATO highly values its dialogue with India, and I see great potential to do more. This includes sharing information and expertise and coordinating common approaches and shared interests, from the changing geopolitical landscape to the role of new technologies, and from safeguarding cyberspace to strengthening global governance, including on arms control. NATO provides a strong platform in which to build a global community of democracies to defend our values and of life. And here's the important part, folks. It also allows you to get into supply chain of some of the leading defense platforms. You've got to remember. And what does A. West Mitchell writes? NATO, India's next geopolitical destination. Partnering with NATO also carries technological benefits and defense technology benefits. NATO's partnerships are highly customized arrangements. In India's case, the sheer size and importance of the country may warrant a new and special category of partnership, one that combines periodic high-level dialogue, technological cooperation, and defense planning for maritime conditions. All this, NATO can play a much larger role than Russia, folks. Just remember that. In this emerging competition, India is a vital player in its own rights and should be treated as such. But Indians should be under no illusion that a truly non-aligned path remains a viable option. But I don't think so, right?
Strengthening ties with NATO now, while China is still in the early phase of a shift to a more assertive posture towards both South Asia and Europe, could pay dividends in dissuading aggression and ensuring that should China continue on its current trajectory, India has many friends as possible in the rightness. And this is where I get Mr. Ghosh. Mr. Ghosh has not read Ashley G. Tellis. I suggest he does, okay, before he opens his gab. Okay, here we got what? China, a global security challenge, says NATO. Alliance portrays Chinese military ambitions in a confrontational way for the first time. A NATO, Biden says, defense of Europe a sacred obligation. And this is really important because he had a really good... And what did China say? Stop slandering China. Beijing says to G7 and NATO to jointly respond to attacks in space force. More conclusion, what C. Raja Mohan writes, and that's very important for all of us to note about NATO. He says why Delhi must talk to NATO. A pragmatic engagement with NATO must be an important part of India's new European orientation, especially amidst the continent's search for a new role in the Indo-Pacific. Watch these two, and the fact that the NATO chief was at the Raisina dialogue, interesting, right? Any suggestion that India should engage with NATO is usually met with a cold stare in Delhi. India in recent years has broken many presumed political taboos in its foreign policy, but talking to NATO is not one of them. But obviously they have. Why are regular consultations with NATO, the post-war military alliance between the US and Europe, so unimaginable in Delhi? During the Cold War, India's refusal was premised on its non-alignment, but that was a bullshit. An Indian-NATO dialogue would simply mean having regular contacts with a military alliance, most of whose members are well-established partners of India. Underline, if Delhi is eager to draw reluctant Russia into discussions on the Indo-Pacific, it makes little sense in avoiding engagement with NATO, which is now debating a role in Asia's waters. India has military exchanges with many members of NATO, including the US, Britain, France, in bilateral and minilateral formats. Why then is a collective engagement with NATO problematic? India's real problem is not with NATO, but with Delhi's difficulty in thinking strategically about Europe. This inhibition has deep roots. Through colonial era, Calcutta and Delhi viewed Europe through British eyes. After independence, Delhi intended to see Europe through Russian lens. And this is the problem, right? Because Britain had problems before independence with everybody, Netherlands, France, everybody, right? As the Cold War enveloped the world, nuancing Europe became harder in Delhi. India began to see West Europeans as an extension of the US and East Europe as a collection of Soviet satellites. Europe's many internal contradictions did not disappear in the Cold War, but Delhi's rigid ideological framing of the world in East-West and North-South axis left little room for creative engagements with Europe. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union demanded a fresh approach to Europe, but Delhi could not devote the kind of strategic attention that Europe demanded, but now it seems to. Delhi appears to be poised for a vigorous new push in Europe this year. A pragmatic engagement with NATO must be an important part of India's new European orientation, especially amidst continent's search for a new role in the Indo-Pacific. To play any role in the Indo-Pacific, Europe and NATO need partners like India, Australia and Japan. Delhi in turn knows that no single power can produce stability and security in the Indo-Pacific. India's enthusiasm for Quad is a recognition of the need to build coalitions. A sustained dialogue between India and NATO could facilitate productive exchanges in a range of areas, including terrorism, changing geopolitics, the evolving nature of military conflicts. Would Russia be upset with India's engagement with NATO? Russia has not made a secret of its allergy to the Quad, and Delhi's dalliance with Washington. Putting NATO into the mix is unlikely to make much difference. Delhi in turn can't be happy with the deepening ties between Moscow and Beijing, and that's our opening. Mature states, India and Russia, know they have to insulate their bilateral relationship from the larger structural trends buffeting the world today. But Russia thinks that they are boss, right? Meanwhile, China has long understood Europe's salience and invested massively in cultivating it. Delhi's continued reluctance to engage a major European institution like NATO will be a stunning case of strategic denial. And that info lies the truth. NATO is another leg we need to catch on to. Jai Hind.